Launch the Slayer.
So Doom: The Dark Ages is out, and I just completed the campaign on Ultraviolence at 110% game speed a couple days ago. It seems like there's a new Doom game every 4 to 5 years after Doom 2016 revitalized the series for good. The release of a new Doom title has since become a pretty exciting moment for FPS veterans and enthusiasts alike around the world, with more and more casual players pouring in every time. Having barely played a few classic Doom titles, I jumped into Doom Eternal in 2020 for my first serious Doom experience, and it has since become my favorite game of all time, bar none. Neither any of the Doom titles I've played in the following years, nor the myriad of FPS games on the market I've enjoyed, have been able to compare to Doom Eternal in the slightest. When I first heard that the successor to Doom Eternal, which was called Doom Year Zero at the time, was going to be a prequel, I was certainly doubtful that anything could be improved or iterated from the phenomenally crafted combat loop that was Eternal. Needless to say, I think we've got something very special on our hands with Doom: The Dark Ages. Let's talk about it. So we know that id Software has had a pattern going since Doom 2016 where each new modern Doom game shares both theming and overall design with the classic Doom titles. Doom 2016 is the spiritual successor to Doom 1. Doom Eternal does the same with Doom 2, you get the idea. To me, it seems like the Dark Ages is going for Doom 64 with an alternate setting and dramatically different art style. There's so many unbelievably stunning areas throughout this game that often feel like art pieces of their own, and you really end up feeling like there was nothing the devs couldn't translate over from the concept art. We've seen a lot of castles and sky-high towers in the past 2 Doom games, so initially I wasn't too fond of seeing even more of those environments when the primary focus was a medieval setting. Thankfully, that is not the case. There's still a few towers and castles as you'd expect, but there's so much more to appreciate in the sheer variety of environments and locations you get to witness. The city of Rayul, the Temple of Lomarith, and the Harbor of Souls are definitely the highlights here, and feel like a much needed breath of fresh air following the maddening fortresses of hell and majestic sentinel bases of old. I'm not the biggest fan of Doom 64, and I certainly don't prefer its gameplay or soundtrack over the first 2 Doom games, but id Software knocked it out of the park with Doom 64's atmosphere and feel, and the Dark Ages is able to replicate that aspect down to a T. Especially in how immersive and otherworldly some of these unique areas are in the latter half of the game. Atmosphere can't just be established by visuals alone though, there's also got to be some equally pleasing. Unfortunately, I found many of the tracks to be unusually forgettable during my time playing the Dark Ages, and I'm definitely not alone. Many fans are aware of the terrible conditions and controversy surrounding the creation of Doom Eternal's soundtrack, and the tragic end of exceptionally talented composer Mick Gordon's long-standing relationship with id Software. And if you're not up to date, Mick Gordon's own article explaining this awful fiasco in great detail will be linked in the cards right now. Even for the people who either don't know or care about what happened, it's undeniable that Mick Gordon has been sorely missed ever since his departure from the franchise. The aspect of Mick Gordon's music that made it work so damn well with Doom was above all else how layered and complex his compositions were. There were so many different elements of every part of the soundtrack of both Doom 2016 and Eternal that made it an absolute delight to hear, and undoubtedly made up one of the best aspects of both games respectively. His unwavering ambition to experiment was never lost on me. From a death metal choir to aggressive, relentless guitar riffs, Mick Gordon was an untouchable legend of the video game industry, and remains as such to this day. With the release of the Ancient Gods DLC for Doom Eternal, Andrew Holschult would try his hand at curating unique compositions that could match the heights of Mick Gordon's work on the campaign. While the soundtrack he made could have never been comparable to Gordon's, the music he made still had its own flair and still felt very much representative of what a modern Doom game should sound like. It was an absolutely respectable effort, and I personally really enjoyed it. With all of that being said, there was a simmering wave of skepticism that began to surround the music for Doom: The Dark Ages. The developers seemed to have very little to say about the music for this new title. Even the developer direct, which was leading up to the release and provided much of the promotional material for the game, only told us that the music was being produced by Finishing Move, a new choice of composers for the series that was not Andrew Holschult for some reason, and certainly not Mick Gordon, of course. Considering how music was an essential part of both Doom 2016 and Eternal, this was a concerning announcement, made even more baffling by not choosing to work with Andrew Holschult again, but id Software had already made their choice. We would just have to wait and see how it all turned out. The big keystone track for this game was When the Shadows First Lengthened, which plays in the main menu. It's an exceptional song, albeit with a pretty uneventful build-up, but for me, this is the only track that truly stood out to me. The soundtrack for the rest of my playthrough never jumped out at me, feeling more like background music than an actively important part of the experience like it was in the previous two Doom games. Even when I revisited the soundtrack after finishing the game, I struggled to find many tracks that really stuck with me. Finishing Move's soundtrack here feels like it's severely lacking the complexity and layered compositions that made both Gordon and Holschult's work stand on their own, especially when many of the tracks made for combat encounters just refuse to use more than the same rotation of 3 to 4 instruments. Hell, even the guitar riffs feel repetitive, which is a complaint I never thought I'd have for a Doom game in my life. There was simply never a moment where I had to pause the game to admire what I was hearing, or a point where my focus completely shifted from the gameplay to the music during a battle. However, I do think Finishing Move got one thing right: the atmospheric music in between combat encounters. There are some really powerful, suspenseful, and inquisitive tracks, especially in the Cosmic Plane, that are quite impactful to the world building and overall theming of the whole game. This was definitely the music that Finishing Move excelled at, and I wish someone else was sent in for the high-intensity songs like Holschult, but I digress. The rest of the soundtrack certainly isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination and does its job decently well, but it does leave much to be desired in feeling anywhere near as notable as Doom 2016 or Eternal did.
It would appear that the Slayer no longer wishes to be detained here.
Shield power down to 35%.
I think the writers were pretty self-aware about the story being a prequel, and they knew the stakes had to be pretty high if they wanted it to hit hard. Once we got that shot of the Slayer's bloodied helmet being thrown out of a portal from the first trailer, I knew they had something special going. The plot in the first few chapters has a pretty shallow landing, but the characters introduced here are incredibly well designed and are pretty interesting to follow throughout the campaign. Commander Thera is a badass new lead that introduces much more gravity to the stakes being set, and Prince Azric is my favorite villain in the entire Doom series, in personality, demeanor, and especially his phenomenal design. There's an intriguing build-up following the 2 Siege chapters that pushes a lot more of the narrative to unravel, and everything finally kicks into high gear at chapter 18. I'm not going to get into spoilers here, but that string of cutscenes from the end of chapter 18 to 19 might be my favorite plot twist in the entire series. There's also an amazing reference to Doom 2016 at this moment in the campaign, which I'm sure a lot of fans caught almost immediately. This really feels like Doom's most cohesive story arc up to this point, and it's already begun to stand on its own in how potent it is. Doom 2016's plotline felt unimportant for the most part due to a lot of the focus being on how explosively triumphant the reboot was for the series in every other aspect except for the actual story campaign. Doom Eternal definitely had something going, and felt a lot more polished akin to the Dark Ages once the Ancient Gods DLC came out, but the exposition was still split between cutscenes and codex entries. Here, I finally feel like the codex entries can be safely treated as supplementary, yet optional lore pieces for the enthusiasts, or even regular players who feel a little more invested in this specific plotline, or that character's backstory. The writers at id have finally understood how they can curate a campaign that crowns the story as its main focus, rather than feeling like a mission-to-mission intro and outro movie that takes a backseat to let the gameplay take over and speak for itself. I just hope the upcoming DLC can provide a strong finish to this narrative arc whenever it releases. Speaking of gameplay though, as soon as this game was announced with the introduction of difficulty sliders and heavier, more weighty combat, I knew the appeal for Dark Ages would be split, and it was. I think a lot of the disappointment for Dark Ages comes from the fans expecting something more unrealistic than the usual for a new Doom game. With the unique structure of the combat system and how the game flows from moment to moment, there's simply no way this game could have been more chaotic or bombastic than the likes of Doom Eternal. With that being said though, I really appreciate the direction the devs took here. You can approach an encounter with a variety of very satisfying weapons, the shield saw is versatile and an integral part of your arsenal, and even the boss fights are just a tad bit better this time around, with some exceptionally designed bosses in the final act of the campaign that are truly a blast to spar with. I don't mind the new glory kill system too much, but I do wish that the sparse moments where a fully animated glory kill cutscene is being played, akin to 2016 or Eternal, used less of the shield saw and more of the variety of weapons that the Slayer keeps at hand. The super shotgun is just as beautifully satisfying as it always has been, and they've made it so incredibly strong this time around that I had to start reminding myself to use the rest of the weapons. The new chain shot is a very enjoyable alternative to Doom Eternal's Ballista. The Shredder is just as fun to use as it looked in the trailer, and both the Dread Mace and Impaler always hit like a truck. I really have no complaints with the gameplay or weapons given to us in the Dark Ages, save for one specific opinion I've had for years now. I feel like the combat shotgun often gets completely overshadowed by the super shotgun in utility and power, which is very understandable and something I absolutely love, but the combat shotgun often ends up with very little usage in the late game. In Doom Eternal, this is nullified since the sticky bomb is an essential part of destroying enemy weak points, but Doom 2016 and the Dark Ages both suffer from this issue quite a bit. This is a very niche critique, and the amount of usage the combat shotgun gets will definitely vary from person to person, so it's mainly just a personal thing. Also, the audio design is excellent this time around and brings some much needed punch to every fight, be it melee strikes, the Slayer making a dramatically powerful landing on the ground, or the super shotgun's heavy blasts of decimation. It's just amazing all around, and I'm glad that all of the game's animations complement it greatly. With this new release, it has once again proven the undeniable. No one in this industry can do what they do, and there is much respect to be held with that. With every new release from id Software, the core definition of the FPS genre is revolutionized. It's happened countless times. Wolfenstein and the original Doom were genre-defining titans of PC gaming. Quake represented the age of the 3D arena shooter in equal parts combat and movement, later establishing the concept of competitive FPS with Quake 3. And Doom 2016 instantly became one of the most important games of the decade, reminding everyone that the triumphs of old were here to stay. Recently, we've seen the wave of FPS titles following the success of Doom Eternal in 2020 in the indie scene with Ultrakill, Turbo Overkill, and many more. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see the same surge of inspiration take hold of the industry with this hell-crushing grip very soon. Thank you for watching. This is the first video in a brand new series of reviews I'm going to be calling Type R, inspired by Ridge Racer Type 4. And if you're interested in what I'm up to these days, you can go check out my backlogged and my letterboxd in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.